A first-class flight attendant, dripping with disdain, orders a black man to the back of the plane, her voice echoing with prejudice. She smirks, enjoying her power, completely unaware of the storm she's about to unleash. Because the man she just tried to humiliate isn't just any passenger. He's the billionaire who owns the entire airline. Her world is about to crumble, and you'll have a front-row seat to the most satisfying karma you've ever witnessed. This isn't just a story. It's a lesson in just how fast the tables can turn. Stay tuned. The air in the private terminal of Van Nuys Airport hummed with an exclusive quiet. The scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of a commercial airport. This was the world of Aura Jets, a boutique airline that catered to the whims of the wealthy and powerful. And on this particular sun-drenched California morning, one of its most frequent, yet least ostentatious clients was about to board. Damon Sterling, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation in the tech world, stood by the expansive window, watching the ground crew meticulously prepare the Gulfstream G650 that would be his ride to New York. Dressed in a simple yet elegant black turtleneck, dark jeans, and a pair of well-worn but clearly expensive leather boots, he could have easily been mistaken for a personal assistant or a junior executive. There was no flashy jewelry, no designer logos screaming for attention, just a quiet confidence that radiated from him like a subtle warm glow. Damon's journey to this point had been anything but simple. He'd grown up in the tough neighborhoods of Inglewood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. From a young age, he'd shown a prodigious talent for coding, a skill he'd honed in the school library, and on a second-hand computer he'd pieced together at himself. His big break came in his early 20s when he developed a revolutionary piece of software that streamlined data security for major corporations. The world of Silicon Valley, initially resistant to a young black man with no formal Ivy League pedigree, couldn't ignore the sheer genius of his creation. Now, at 42, Damon was the CEO of Sterling Innovations, a multi-billion-dollar empire he had built from the ground up. He owned patents that were integral to the functioning of the modern internet, had a portfolio of investments that spanned from renewable energy to cutting-edge medical research, and about 3 years ago he had acquired Aura Jets. The airline had been a passion project, a way to create a travel experience that was not just luxurious, but also seamless and respectful. He believed that the journey was just as important as the destination. Today's flight was a last-minute decision. A crucial meeting with investors in New York had been moved up, and rather than disrupt the schedule of one of his corporate jets, he'd opted to take a seat on one of Aura's semi-private flights. These flights offered the luxury of a private jet experience, but with a few other passengers, a model that had proven to be incredibly popular. He was looking forward to a quiet 5 hours to review his presentation and perhaps catch a little sleep. He had no idea that this flight would be anything but quiet. As boarding was announced, Damon picked up his worn leather satchel and headed for the tarmac. He gave a warm, familiar nod to the pilots, who greeted him with genuine respect, though even they were unaware of his ownership of the airline. To them, he was simply Mr. Sterling, a valued and unassuming regular. As he stepped onto the plane, he was met by the lead flight attendant, Brenda. She was in her late 40s with meticulously coiffed blonde hair and a smile that was as bright as it was forced. Brenda had been with Aura Jets since its inception, and she prided herself on her professionalism. But beneath the veneer of practiced hospitality lay a deep-seated prejudice, a collection of ugly stereotypes that she kept carefully hidden from her employers, but that often seeped out in her interactions with certain passengers. Brenda's eyes swept over Damon, taking in his simple attire and his relaxed demeanor. In her mind, the equation was simple. A black man in casual clothes did not belong in the exclusive cabin of an Aura jet. She'd seen his name on the manifest, of course, Damon Sterling, but it meant nothing to her. She imagined he was a musician or an athlete, someone who had come into a sudden windfall of cash and had no idea how to behave in a setting of true wealth. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too saccharine. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She gestured vaguely towards the back of the cabin. "You'll be in 7A." Damon paused. He had specifically booked 2A, a spacious seat at the front of the cabin. "I believe I'm in 2A," he said politely, holding out his boarding pass. Brenda barely glanced at it. "Oh, there must have been a last-minute change. We needed to accommodate a priority passenger." 7A is a lovely seat. You'll be very comfortable." She had already turned her attention to the next passenger, a white man in a crisp suit who was struggling with his carry-on. "Here, let me help you with that. Mr. Harrison." Brenda gushed, her voice now dripping with genuine deference. "We'll get this stowed for you in a jiffy. Can I get you a glass of champagne before we take off?" Damon watched the exchange, a familiar feeling of weary resignation washing over him. He had dealt with people like Brenda his entire life. People who made assumptions based on the color of his skin, who saw him not as an individual, but as a caricature. He could have pressed the issue, of course. He could have pulled out his phone, made a single call, and had Brenda removed from the flight before she could say another word. But that wasn't his style. He preferred to observe, to let people reveal their true character. And so, without another word, he made his way to the back of the plane. The cabin itself was a marvel of modern aviation design. Cream-colored leather seats, polished wood accents, and soft indirect lighting created an atmosphere of serene luxury. Each seat was a self-contained pod with a personal entertainment system, a pull-out table, and ample storage space. The other passengers, a mix of business executives and well-heeled vacationers, were already settling in their quiet conversations, a low hum in the background. Damon took his seat in 7A, which was, as Brenda had said, a perfectly lovely seat. But it wasn't the seat he had chosen, and the reason for the change was a bitter pill to swallow. He pulled out his laptop, determined to focus on his work, but he found his attention drifting. He watched Brenda as she moved through the cabin, her every action a study in selective service. She refilled Mr. Harrison's champagne glass 3 times before they had even pushed back from the gate. She engaged in a lengthy animated conversation with a woman in 3B about her upcoming trip to the Hamptons. She offered warm towels and artisanal snacks to the passengers at the front of the cabin, her laughter tinkling like a wind chime. When she finally made her way to the back, her demeanor shifted. The warm, engaging flight attendant was replaced by a brisk, almost curt functionary. She took Damon's drink order, a simple sparkling water, with a clipped "certainly," and returned with it moments later, placing it on his table with a little too much force. There was no friendly banter, no offer of a snack, just a cold, dismissive silence. Damon knew what this was. It was a power play, a subtle but unmistakable message that he was not welcome, that he was an outsider in this world of privilege. It was a performance he had seen countless times before, in boardrooms, in high-end restaurants, in the very offices of the venture capitalists who had once scoffed at his ideas. And as always, he met it with a quiet, unyielding calm. He would not give Brenda the satisfaction of a reaction. He would not let her poison his journey. But as the flight progressed, Brenda's microaggressions began to escalate. She forgot to bring him a menu for the in-flight meal, only remembering when he politely reminded her. When he asked for a blanket, she told him they were all in use, despite the fact that he could clearly see a stack of them in a nearby storage compartment. Each slight was a small pinprick, a tiny tear in the fabric of the respectful and luxurious experience that Aura Jets promised to provide. And with each pinprick, Damon's resolve began to harden. He was no longer just an observer. He was the owner of this airline, and this woman with her ugly, casual bigotry was not just insulting him. She was insulting his company, his vision, and every single employee who worked hard to uphold the standards he had set. He had intended to remain anonymous on this flight, to experience his airline as a regular passenger. But now he realized he had a responsibility to act. Not just for himself, but for any other passenger who might be subjected to Brenda's brand of service. The quiet, unassuming man in 7A was about to remind everyone, and especially Brenda, that the true measure of a person is not the color of their skin or the clothes they wear, but the content of their character. And Brenda's character, he had decided, was sorely lacking. The storm was gathering, and she was blissfully, dangerously unaware of the hurricane that was about to make landfall. The flight was about 2 hours in somewhere over the vast patchwork quilt of the American Midwest, when the situation escalated from a series of passive-aggressive slights to an open confrontation. The catalyst was something as mundane as a spilled drink. Mr. Harrison, the passenger in 2A, whom Brenda had been fawning over since he'd boarded, was gesturing emphatically while telling a story, and the back of his hand connected with his glass of red wine. The dark liquid arced through the air, splashing across the aisle and onto the floor. Brenda was there in an instant, a flurry of apologies and frantic blotting with linen napkins. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, don't you worry about a thing. It's no trouble at all. Let me get that for you. Can I bring you another glass? A Merlot, perhaps?" As she was cleaning up the mess, another passenger, a young woman in 4B, pressed her call button. Brenda, with a huff of annoyance, straightened up and walked over to her. "Yes?" she asked, her tone making it clear that this was an interruption. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but would it be possible to get a different meal? I have a gluten intolerance, and I think there was a mix-up." Brenda's smile was tight, her patience clearly wearing thin. "The meals have already been catered. We can't just whip up a new one. I can offer you a fruit plate." "A fruit plate?" For dinner, the woman asked, her voice a mix of surprise and disappointment. "It's that or nothing," Brenda said dismissively, before turning her attention back to Mr. Harrison. Damon had been watching the entire exchange, his jaw tightening. This was not the Aura Jets experience. This was a masterclass in poor customer service driven by a clear and ugly bias. He decided it was time to intervene, not with a display of authority, but with a simple, direct request. He pressed his own call button. It took Brenda a full 5 minutes to respond. She walked to his seat with a look of undisguised irritation on her face. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "I was hoping I could get that blanket." "Now," Damon said, his voice calm and even. "I see that you have some available in the overhead compartment." Brenda's eyes flashed with anger. She had been caught in a lie, and by the very person she had been trying to put in his place. "Those are reserved," she snapped. Reserved for whom Damon asked, his gaze unwavering. "For the priority passengers," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And I'm not a priority passenger." Brenda let out a short, derisive laugh. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, But you're in the back of the plane for a reason. You need to stop making demands and just enjoy the flight. Quietly. This was it. The moment of truth. Damon could see the other passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The young woman with the gluten intolerance was watching with wide eyes. Even Mr. Harrison had stopped his story to listen. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," Damon said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "I'm simply trying to understand the rules of this airline. Because it seems to me that the rules are being applied selectively." Brenda's face was a mask of fury. Her carefully constructed composure had crumbled, and the raw, unfiltered prejudice that lay beneath was now on full display. "The rules are the rules," she hissed, "and I'm the one who enforces them. And right now, I'm enforcing the rule that says you need to stay in your seat and not bother the other passengers." "And if I don't?" Damon asked, his voice now taking on a steely edge. Brenda leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. "Then I will have you removed from this flight when we land. We have a zero-tolerance policy for disruptive passengers." She smirked, a cruel, triumphant little twist of her lips. "Now, is there anything else?" Damon paused, letting her words hang in the air. He looked past her down the aisle to the front of the plane. He saw the other flight attendant, a young man named Mark, watching the scene with a look of growing horror on his face. He saw the co-pilot emerge from the cockpit, alerted by the raised voices. Then he looked back at Brenda, and for the first time he let a hint of the power he wielded show in his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice clear and resonant in the suddenly silent cabin. "There is something else. I'd like you to get me the name of your supervisor." Brenda's smirk widened. "I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight. I am the supervisor. Then I'll need the name of your manager, the one you report to on the ground. You're not in a position to be asking for that," she sneered. "Oh, I think I am," Damon said. He reached into his satchel and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, his movements slow and deliberate. He found the name he was looking for: Daniel Connolly, CEO of Aura Jets. He didn't press the call button. He simply held the phone up so that Brenda could see the name on the screen. Brenda's eyes widened, but she still didn't understand. "You think I'm going to be intimidated because you have the CEO's name in your phone? Anyone can do that." "You're right," Damon said. "Anyone can. But not everyone gets a call from him every morning to go over the daily operations of the airline." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Brenda's face. She looked at the phone, then at Damon's calm, unblinking eyes. A seed of doubt had been planted. It was at that moment that the co-pilot, a man named Captain Evans, stepped forward. He was a veteran pilot who had been with Aura Jets for years, and he had flown Damon on several occasions. He had been in the cockpit for most of the flight, but the escalating tension in the cabin had drawn him out. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "Is there a problem here?" Brenda's head whipped around. She stared at the co-pilot, then back at Damon. The color drained from her face. "Mr. Sterling," she stammered. Captain Evans nodded. "Yes?" "Damon Sterling. Our owner." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Brenda's world. Owner. The man she had been tormenting, the man she had dismissed and insulted and tried to humiliate, was the very person who signed her paychecks, the one who held her entire career in his hands. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Her carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of prejudice and a sense of unearned superiority, had just been leveled by a single word. The cabin was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the engines. Every eye was on Brenda, on the woman who had, in the space of a few hours, flown her career straight into a mountain. Damon slowly lowered his phone. He looked at Brenda, his expression not of triumph, but of profound disappointment. "You were saying something about a zero-tolerance policy," he asked, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The only sound was the shattering of her own arrogance, a sound that was deafening in the sudden, terrible silence of the cabin. The storm had not just made landfall, it had unleashed its full devastating force, and Brenda was standing right at the center of it. The silence that followed Captain Evans's revelation was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low drone of the Gulf Stream's engines. Brenda stood frozen, her face a canvas of dawning horror. The name Sterling now echoed in her mind, not as the name of some upstart musician, but as the name on the side of the very plane she was standing in. Sterling Innovations, Aura Jets, a subsidiary of Sterling Innovations. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift, and the ground beneath her gave way. Her bravado, her sneering condescension evaporated in an instant, replaced by a desperate, panicked scramble for survival. Her professional smile, the one she had weaponized, so effectively returned, but this time it was a grotesque parody, a trembling, pleading grimace. "Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her voice a choked whisper. I had no idea. It's an honor to have you aboard. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Damon's expression remained unchanged. He was no longer looking at her with anger, but with a kind of clinical detachment, as if studying a specimen. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "It seemed quite clear to me. You understood that you were speaking to a passenger. You understood that you were denying a simple request for a blanket. You understood that you were lying about it. And you understood that you were threatening to have me removed from the flight for questioning your authority. What exactly did you misunderstand?" Each question was a precise surgical cut, dissecting her flimsy excuse and exposing the ugly truth beneath. Brenda flinched as if struck. I was just trying to maintain order," she said, her voice cracking. "Some passengers can be demanding. Damon's voice rose slightly, and for the first time a flash of fire appeared in his eyes. "You mean like the young woman in 4B, who was demanding a meal she could actually eat? Or was she not a priority passenger either?" The woman in 4B looked down at her lap, a flush of vindication on her cheeks. Mr. Harrison in 2A had the decency to look ashamed, sinking lower in his seat, as if trying to disappear into the expensive leather. "Please, sir." Brenda begged, her composure completely gone. She took a step forward, her hands outstretched in a gesture of supplication. "I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. A lapse in judgment. It won't happen again. I promise." "You're right about one thing," Damon said, his voice cold and final. "It won't happen again." He turned his gaze to the co-pilot. "Captain Evans, I want her removed from duty for the remainder of this flight. She is not to interact with any more passengers. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Captain Evans said, his voice firm. He looked at Brenda, his expression one of professional disappointment. "Brenda, you'll stay in the galley until we land. Mark will handle the cabin." The younger flight attendant, Mark, who had been watching from the front of the plane, nodded, his face a mixture of relief and trepidation. Brenda looked as if she had been slapped. The public humiliation was a fresh wave of agony. To be stripped of her duties in front of the very passengers she had been lauding her authority over was a fate worse than any private reprimand. "But, sir," she began, her voice pleading. "There is nothing more to discuss." Damon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned his attention back to his laptop, a clear and unequivocal dismissal. The conversation was over. Her career, for all intents and purposes, was over. She just didn't know the full extent of it yet. With a final desperate look at Damon's impassive profile, Brenda turned and stumbled towards the galley, her face pale and her movements stiff. The curtain swished shut behind her, a flimsy barrier between her and the consequences of her actions. A strange atmosphere settled over the cabin. The tension had broken, but the air was still thick with the residue of the confrontation. Captain Evans, ever the professional, moved to smooth things over. He personally apologized to the woman in 4B and promised to have a proper gluten-free meal waiting for her when they landed, along with a full refund for her flight. He then walked over to Damon's seat. "Mr. Sterling," he said in a low voice on behalf of the entire crew, "I am deeply sorry for what you experienced today. This is not the standard we aim for at Aura Jets." Damon looked up from his laptop and gave the captain a faint, weary smile. "I know it's not, Captain, and I appreciate your handling of the situation. You and Mark have been nothing but professional." "Is there anything at all I can get for you?" the captain asked. "A blanket, perhaps?" A hint of a wry smile touched his lips. Damon chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to release some of the pent-up tension. "A blanket would be great, thank you." As the captain retrieved a blanket from the overhead compartment, the very one Brenda had claimed was reserved, a quiet ripple of change went through the cabin. Mark, the younger flight attendant, moved through the aisle with a newfound confidence. He offered drinks and snacks to everyone, his service attentive and genuine. He made a point of stopping at Damon's seat, his eyes full of a respect that bordered on awe. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a little shaky, "I just want to say thank you for not letting that slide." Damon nodded. "Just do your job well, son. Treat everyone with respect. That's all I ask." For the remainder of the flight, a strange sense of camaraderie filled the cabin. The other passengers, who had been strangers just hours before, now shared a common experience. They exchanged knowing glances, their quiet conversations punctuated by occasional headshakes in the direction of the galley curtain. They had witnessed something more than just a rude flight attendant being put in her place. They had seen a powerful lesson in humility and respect delivered at 40,000 feet. Damon, wrapped in his blanket, finally allowed himself to relax. He hadn't sought this confrontation, but now that it was over, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He had built his empire on a foundation of innovation and integrity, and he would not allow the rot of prejudice to fester within it. As the plane began its descent into New York, the city lights twinkling like a carpet of fallen stars, Damon knew that the real work was just beginning. The incident with Brenda was not just an isolated event. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, one that he was now more determined than ever to solve. The fallout from this flight would be significant, not just for Brenda, but for the entire culture of Aura Jets. The storm had passed, but the cleanup was just beginning, and Damon Sterling was the man who would oversee it every step of the way. The descent of the Gulf Stream G650 into Teterboro Airport was for most on board a smooth transition back to the solid ground of their own important lives. For Brenda, it was a slow, agonizing fall from the only heaven she had ever known. The professional mask she had worn for 2 decades had been shattered, and she could feel the shards digging into her. From her forced exile in the galley, she could hear the quiet, restored hum of the main cabin, the low murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, the confident, professional tone of Mark's voice as he prepared for landing. It was the sound of a world that had already moved on without her, the sound of her own irrelevance. When the jet finally came to a stop on the tarmac, the engines whining down into silence, a profound and terrible finality settled over her. This was no longer a mid-flight incident that could be smoothed over with a carefully worded report. This was a reckoning. As the passengers disembarked, offering respectful nods to Captain Evans and warm thanks to Mark, Brenda was instructed to remain on board. She watched through the small galley window as Damon Sterling descended the stairs, not with the swagger of a victor, but with the weary posture of a man who had been forced to clean up a mess he didn't create. He was met on the tarmac by a sleek black town car and was gone in a whisper of quiet power, having already sent the 2 text messages that would detonate Brenda's life. A ground operations manager, a stern-faced woman Brenda had known for years, came aboard. There was no friendly greeting. Her expression was a cold, impenetrable mask of corporate procedure. "Brenda," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "you need to come with me. Bring your personals." In a small, sterile office in the private terminal, the manager slid a form across the table. "You're on indefinite administrative leave, pending a full investigation. We'll need your crew ID and all other company property." The act of unclipping her wings from her lapel felt like a physical amputation. Handing over the plastic ID card, the one that had granted her access to a world of privilege and prestige, felt like surrendering her very identity. She was no longer Brenda-led flight attendant for Aura Jets. She was just Brenda, a woman in a uniform she no longer had the right to wear, being escorted to a prepaid hotel room with the chillingly polite instruction not to contact any other employees until the investigation was concluded. The door to the hotel room closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the world she knew, and sealing her inside a new one, defined by dread. While Brenda was left to stew in the panicked silence of her room, the story of her downfall was blossoming into life online. The tech blogger from Seat 4B, a woman named Clara Jensen, was a gifted storyteller with a fiercely loyal following who trusted her eye for detail and her sharp sense of justice. That evening, from her suite at the Carlisle, she published a post titled, "At 40,000 feet, a masterclass in arrogance and a lesson in true power." She wrote with a novelist's flair, painting a vivid picture of the luxurious cabin, the escalating microaggressions, and the entitled, sneering attitude of the lead flight attendant, whom she nicknamed the Queen of 714. She described Damon not as a billionaire owner, but simply as the gentleman in 7A, a figure of immense dignity and restraint, who absorbed every slight with a quiet, unnerving calm. The climax of the story, the co-pilot's reveal of the gentleman's identity, was rendered with cinematic tension. The post was a floral masterpiece. By the time Brenda woke the next morning to the relentless buzzing of her phone, the post had been shared over 100,000 times. It had been picked up by major tech journalists on Twitter, hit the front page of Reddit's Hard Justice Served, and was being dissected on news forums across the globe. Her friends and family were forwarding her the link with frantic messages. "Is this you? And what did you do?" The official Aura Jets investigation was a mere formality, a corporate autopsy on a career that was already dead. The process was ruthlessly efficient. Maria Flores, the head of HR, conducted the interviews herself. Captain Evans and Mark provided concise, factual, and damning accounts that corroborated Clara Jensen's blog post in every detail. HR also unearthed a previously overlooked complaint from 6 months prior, where a wealthy South American businessman had noted Brenda's dismissive and impatient attitude, which he felt was because of his accented English. At the time, it had been dismissed as a cultural misunderstanding. Now, it looked like a clear data point in a disturbing pattern. Brenda's interview was a catastrophe. Conducted via video call, she appeared flustered and defensive. Her narrative shifted constantly. At first, she claimed Damon had been aggressive and threatening. When confronted with the dozen testimonies to the contrary, she pivoted, saying she had been feeling unwell and wasn't herself. When that was transparently false, she fell back on the excuse that she was simply trying to maintain order on a demanding flight. She lied, she obfuscated, she contradicted herself. It was the desperate, incoherent rambling of someone who knew they were caught and had no honorable way out. 48 hours after the flight landed, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her hotel room. Inside the termination letter, spelled out her professional death in cold, legalistic language. Gross misconduct. Violation of Section 4 of the Employee Code of Conduct. Discriminatory behavior. Endangering the company's reputation. It was absolute. It was final. And yet the karma was just getting started. Aura Jets's public statement, which announced the termination, was carefully worded to avoid naming her. But the internet abhors a vacuum. An anonymous user on a private airline employee forum, likely a disgruntled former colleague, posted, "The Queen of 714 is Brenda Walsh. Good riddance." Within an hour, her full name, her LinkedIn profile picture, and her personal Facebook page were public domain. The digital mob descended. She became #PlainKaren. Memes proliferated, her face photoshopped onto the body of a queen on a throne, demanding a peasant be sent to the back. Her profile picture, with its strained, professional smile, became a symbol of entitled bigotry. Her address was posted on a doxing site, and threatening vile messages began to flood her email and her family's social media. In a move of pure desperation, believing she could somehow reclaim the narrative, she agreed to an exclusive interview with a provocateur on a right-wing news network known for its grievance-based politics. She thought she would find a sympathetic platform to rail against woke corporations and cancel culture. Instead, she walked into an ambush designed for maximum ratings. The host, a man with a predatory smile, feigned sympathy, while his questions were designed to make her look worse. "So Brenda," he began, his voice dripping with faux concern, "you're saying this powerful billionaire, a black man, used his immense privilege to crush a working-class woman like you?" "Exactly," Brenda said, falling into the trap. "I was just doing my job. He was the one causing the scene. This is what they do now. If you're a white woman, you're a target. They're trying to erase people like me." Her performance was a toxic cocktail of self-pity denial and thinly veiled racism. She came across not as a victim, but as a bitter, unrepentant bigot who had learned nothing. The interview was a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. It didn't exonerate her. It convicted her in the court of public opinion for a second time. The real-world consequences were swift and brutal. The GoFundMe her sister had started to help with legal fees was shut down after being overwhelmed with abusive comments. Her landlord, citing a clause in her lease about engaging in behavior that brings the property into public disrepute, served her with an eviction notice, She had 30 days to leave the apartment that her Aura Jet salary had so comfortably afforded her. Her career was not just over, it was scorched earth. She called a former colleague, now a hiring manager at a rival charter company. The phone call was excruciating. "Brenda, listen." Her old friend stammered, his voice thick with discomfort. "I saw the interview. I can't. Nobody can touch you. You're radioactive. I'm sorry." With her savings bleeding away and no prospects, she made the most humiliating call of her life to her younger sister in Ohio. The drive from her chic city apartment to a small vinyl-sided house in a town she'd always looked down upon was a pilgrimage of shame. She sold her car to pay for the moving truck and watched her former life get packed into cardboard boxes. The true karma, however, wasn't the loss of her job, her home, or her status. It was the deafening silence that followed. After the storm of online hate, after the disastrous interview, after the final slammed doors of her profession, there was nothing left to fight. There were no more enemies to blame, no more narratives to spin. There was only her lying awake in the guest room of her sister's house, the floral wallpaper seeming to close in on her in the dark. She was left alone with the one person she could no longer lie to herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to see the incident not through the lens of her own wounded pride, but for what it was. She saw the quiet dignity of Damon Sterling. She saw the undisguised contempt on her own face, and she finally acknowledged the ugly, rotten thing that had lived inside her, the prejudice she had always denied, but had allowed to pilot her actions. The hard ground of reality wasn't just about being unemployed and disgraced. It was the devastating, inescapable realization that she hadn't been the victim of a powerful man's whim. She had been the author of her own very public self-destruction, while Brenda's world imploded, settling into a bleak landscape of regret and anonymity. Damon Sterling was methodically turning the ashes of an ugly incident into the foundation for a stronger, more resilient enterprise. The crisis on Flight 714 had not just angered him, it had ignited a fierce, clarifying purpose. He had built an empire on elegant code and disruptive ideas, but he now saw that the most complex system of all was human culture, and his own had a bug. The 9 a.m. meeting in his New York office was less of a reprimand and more of a reboot. Daniel Connolly, the hand-picked CEO of Aura Jets and the company's head of human resources, a sharp woman named Maria Flores, sat at the long glass table, their faces pale. They had read the initial reports and had come prepared for a storm. What they got was the quiet, unnerving focus of a master architect preparing to tear a building down to its studs to save it from a flawed foundation. "This isn't about one flight attendant," Damon began, his voice even, but carrying an undeniable weight. He gestured to the file in front of him. "Brenda is a symptom. The disease is complacency. We sold luxury Daniel, but we forgot to mandate decency. We built a beautiful house, but didn't vet the people we let live in it. That changes today." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He laid out his vision with a chilling precision. He wasn't just firing a single employee. He was launching a full-scale cultural audit. Within the week, one of the country's top diversity and inclusion consulting firms, a group known for their unflinching and data-driven approach, was retained. Their mandate was absolute access to everything and everyone. No department was off-limits, no executive too senior to be interviewed. The results delivered 6 weeks later were sobering. While the majority of Aura Jets employees were dedicated professionals, the audit uncovered a subtle, pervasive pattern of microaggressions and unconscious bias, particularly among longer-tenured staff who had come from more traditional hierarchical airline backgrounds. Brenda wasn't a lone wolf. She was just the one who had been bold enough to attack the alpha. The overhaul was radical. Damon, alongside Maria Flores, personally oversaw the redesign of the entire employee life cycle, from recruitment to retirement. They implemented a new blind resume review process for corporate positions to mitigate bias. They rewrote the service manuals, shifting the focus from rote procedure to empathetic problem-solving. But the most significant change was the training. It was no longer a once-a-year check-the-box online module. The new program, dubbed the Aura Ethos, was an intensive in-person multi-day seminar required for every single employee, from baggage handlers to the CEO. Damon himself attended the very first session, not as an owner making a cameo, but as a participant. He sat in the circle with pilots, gate agents, and junior flight attendants, his billion-dollar status left at the door. On the second day, during a session on the impact of prejudice, he shared a part of his own story. He spoke of his early days in Silicon Valley, of being mistaken for a delivery driver at a pitch meeting for a company he was trying to secure funding from, of the countless small cuts and indignities that had fueled his drive. "The reason I bought this airline," he told the stunned room, "was because I wanted to create a space where everyone felt seen, not as a seat number or a net worth or a skin color, but as a person." The woman on that flight, she didn't just disrespect a passenger. She disrespected the entire reason we exist. The story had a seismic impact. It transformed the abstract concept of corporate values into a deeply personal mission. Employees felt a renewed sense of pride and purpose. The change was palpable. Mark, the young flight attendant from Flight 714, was promoted to lead in-flight trainer. His appointment was a powerful symbol. A message sent throughout the company: integrity and character were now the primary metrics for advancement. The business world took notice. Aura Jets, once just another luxury brand, became a case study in corporate responsibility. Their profits grew, but more importantly, their reputation soared. Damon leveraged this momentum. He funneled a significant portion of the new profits into launching the Sterling Foundation, a non-profit with a clear and ambitious mission to build new pipelines for underrepresented youth into the worlds of technology and aviation. The foundation didn't just offer scholarships. It created paid internships, mentorship programs, and an incubator for startups founded by people of color. The man told to go to the back of the plane was now paving a runway for thousands to take flight. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn evening, Damon stood at a podium in a glittering Manhattan ballroom for the foundation's inaugural gala. He looked out at a sea of faces: powerful CEOs, influential politicians, and most importantly, the first cohort of Sterling scholars, their eyes shining with a future that was suddenly within their grasp. He was a titan of industry, a celebrated philanthropist, a man at the zenith of his power and influence. On that same evening, 500 miles away, under the humming fluorescent lights of a Kroger grocery store in a quiet Ohio suburb, Brenda scanned a carton of milk. The past year had been a free fall into a life she didn't recognize. The shame had been a physical weight pressing down on her until she had fled her life, moving in with a sister who regarded her with a weary mixture of pity and resentment. Her name, once a toxic meme, had faded from the internet's short-term memory, but the stain on her digital footprint was permanent. The airline industry, the only world she had ever known, was closed to her forever. Her new life was a cycle of mind-numbing repetition. The beep of the scanner, the rustle of plastic bags, the vacant pleasantries exchanged with strangers. The anonymity she had craved was now a kind of prison, erasing the person she had once been. A young black couple approached her checkout lane, their cart filled with groceries for a quiet night in. They were laughing, teasing each other about the brand of ice cream one of them had chosen. Their joy was a small, self-contained bubble in the sterile environment of the store. As Brenda began scanning their items, the man caught her eye and gave her a simple, friendly smile. In that instant, her carefully constructed dam of emotional numbness shattered. It wasn't just that he was a black man. It was the effortless kindness in his eyes, the casual warmth that expected nothing but the same in return. It was the same look Damon Sterling had given her before she had decided to crush it. A wave of vertigo washed over her. She saw not the grocery store, but the plush cabin of the Gulf Stream. She heard not the beeping scanner, but the quiet hum of the engines at 40,000 feet. She felt not the cheap polyester of her work vest, but the crushing weight of a career-ending mistake. She finished their order in a fog, her hands trembling as she handed them the receipt. "Have a good night," she mumbled, her gaze fixed on the worn surface of the conveyor belt. "You too. Take it easy," the man said, his voice bright and untroubled. The couple walked away, their laughter echoing faintly as they pushed their cart toward the automatic doors and disappeared into the night. Brenda stood motionless, her hands resting on the cold metal counter. She watched them go, two people moving through the world with a lightness she could no longer comprehend. The true soul-crushing karma wasn't the lost job, the public shaming, or the exile to this quiet grey town. It was this final inescapable understanding. She had spent her life serving the privileged, believing their comfort was her calling card. Yet she had failed to see that the greatest privilege of all is the simple human grace of seeing another person and meeting them with kindness. She had tried to relegate a man to the back of the plane, and in doing so had locked herself in a cramped, lonely room for the rest of her life. The door was right there, but she had lost the key. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would never find it again. That right there is a story about more than just a rude flight attendant. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. It's how they treat other people. Brenda's prejudice and arrogance cost her everything, not because she messed with a billionaire, but because she disrespected a human being. The karma was so satisfying because it was so deserved. It's a lesson we can all learn from. Kindness and respect cost nothing, but the lack of them can cost you everything. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that this is the kind of justice we need to see more of in the world, then please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and the powerful truth that what goes around always comes around. Thanks for watching.